Welcome to Getting Ghosted. This is an Intuitive Soul Collective podcast, and I'm your host, Allie Horner. Today's episode has been a much requested topic, and it has to do with telepathy. This is such a big topic, and I think it's really important because we want to learn or about how it works, the ethics of it, etc. And so today I'm going to be talking about telepathy and time walking and what's going on for people who are doing that, because a lot of the times they have dementia, Alzheimer's, ADHD, autism, or they're nonverbal for one reason or another. But those aren't the only people who can do it. It's actually part of the larger consciousness shift. So we'll talk about telepathy with exes, telepathy with people that you're dating, people that you will meet, people that you won't ever meet. There's some mention of the telepathy tapes in here. It's going to be an interesting episode all about it. So I hope that you enjoy. And if you want to submit your stories and your questions about this topic, I love a good story. You know me. I love hearing about people's experiences, so feel free to use the link in the show notes to do a podcast submission or reach out with a question, and I might answer it or use your story on a future episode of the podcast. Okay, so the spiritual perspective, or I should say the spirit guide's perspective on dementia. So I've got Eric here and I've got my guides, and everyone is piling on in because they all really want to talk about this. So the first thing they're saying is, well, you have to understand with dementia, what they're really doing is these people are walking in and out of consciousness. And so Eric's saying we kind of have to take this back a step. Because you guys, he's like, y'all think that for the most part, a lot of you guys think you can only talk to spirit, like that mediums, that's all mediums do, is they can only talk to spirit or they can talk to someone on earth in person. And that's pretty much it. And Eric is saying a lot of you guys are familiar with the concept of the higher self, right? So we can talk with the higher self, of course, but what we don't really realize is that we can also have telepathic communication. And a lot of people will kind of joke about it, and they'll have little moments of telepathic communication where you're sitting with someone and you think of like, oh, I really want pizza for dinner. And then suddenly they're like, hey, do you want pizza for dinner? And you're like, I was just thinking that. And a lot of people think that that's all telepathy is, but now we know from the telepathy tapes, what a lot of us have been experiencing, myself included, is the ability to communicate with other people who are still alive, even if they're nowhere near us. And a lot of us are starting to do this a lot more frequently. And because I do so many readings, I think I probably hear about it more because people are asking me to make sure that they're not crazy. Like they're like, am I nuts? Or am I really talking to this person? And I'm like, no, you're really talking to them. And I can understand how weird that feels and how vulnerable that feels. And so one of the other things that I have been seeing and I have been experiencing too for a very long time is I have had moments where I am talking with someone and I will say to them, your energy, it feels like you're a person, like you feel like you're alive. You don't feel like you're in spirit. Is that true? And they'll say, oh, I'm very much alive. And I will ask them, what date or what time are you communicating with me from? And they will often tell me sometime in the past or in the future. So you can communicate with people telepathically across time, space, dimension, and reality. And now most of us will communicate just with spirit or sometimes like different beings, etc., like higher consciousness. But for all intents and purposes, you can actually communicate with people who are in different time periods here on Earth, back and forth. I know that this has been seen with certain past life or future life regressions, as well as higher self regressions that people have done, where they've been able to channel beings who came back from the future. I think Dolores Cannon maybe had an example of that. I might be butchering that. But it's really interesting. And so Eric is kind of pointing this out because he's like, hey, first of all, we kind of have to zoom out and remember that this is possible. And so I know in the telepathy tapes, they talked about all these kids who are mostly nonverbal going to this place called the Hill. And they're not all nonverbal. It's something that a lot of these kids are able to do. And the second I heard about the Hill, I was like, I've been there before. I've gone there. I've talked to some of these kids. I've had different people come through telepathically and they've talked like to me while I've been sitting in a coffee shop or I've been meditating. It works better if I'm meditating or if I'm auto writing, or if I'm in a kind of a Zen state. But I've had people, just do stuff like that. And I have had a lot of encounters with different people, a couple in particular repetitively, where they're talking to me from some other space and I've never met them before. So but I at the same time know them very intimately. And so Eric is over here and he's like, we really want to talk about this because this is really important. And so he's saying, so what happens is a lot of people can have the capability of syncing up with someone who is kind of quote unquote disembodied at times, or their mind is kind of gone to a different zone. And he's saying, so a lot of people can do this intentionally through meditation, or a lot of kids, you might see them zoning out, or people who are nonverbal or have these kind of like minds that can kind of shift between different times and spaces. These people can kind of do a little bit of telepathic communication, or a lot in some cases, and they can actually almost time walk and walk between dimensions. And so they can come and talk to you. And I have literally felt someone in the room with me before, and I understand why people think they're being haunted. And this was talked about in telepathy tapes too. And I think this is so interesting because, and they actually talked about it on Rachel Dratch's podcast not too long ago as well. I'll have to look up the episode and link it in the show notes so you guys can go listen to it. But they talked about how a lot of hauntings are actually other people who are telepathic projecting their energy into the space. And I think a lot of the world wasn't ready for that conversation, but I've definitely shared it before in a podcast episode that my guides have said the same thing. And I've shared this on TikTok and in readings in my classes that I teach and stuff, because I think people don't realize how powerful they are and how much we need to be mindful of our own energy and our own motions and our own feelings and where that can take us. So now, when you're talking about things like dementia and stuff like that, Eric is over here and he's kind of saying, so what we see with dementia is these people look like they're like kind of in and out of time, right? And he's like, well, really, they're walking between dimensions. And so in that time period, they may have another part of their brain that kind of comes online. So like they're confused about the time frame that they're in, or they might act differently, or they may be completely spacing out. And so what's happening though is they're almost like walking back and forth between different worlds, between different consciousness states. And it doesn't mean that they're not still them, but again, it's like they have a foot in between two different worlds. And he said they can even walk in between our world and the non-physical, the spirit world. And so this can be very confusing for them then when they come back and they're almost like in this body and they're so much older and they're completely disoriented, because sometimes they have a younger version of themselves walk back in, or another part of themselves that doesn't remember a lot of who they are, what they were doing, who their family members are, what's happened, etc. And then sometimes that, their current self will pop back in, and it's almost like that's why they'll be sitting there like they suddenly remember you. And it's very emotional for a lot of people who deal with people who have dementia and Alzheimer's. And so he's saying it's really, that's all it is this person's consciousness is able to walk between these different time periods and different worlds. But a lot of people who have dementia and Alzheimer's, what's happening is they can actually be walking out and they will have communication with other people. And this was also mentioned by the gal who does telepathy tapes on Rachel Dratch's podcast. And the gal from Telepathy Tapes mentioned it on her own podcast as well. But there was an experience that they were sent, that they were told about, where someone thought that their house was haunted, and it would only happen at certain times, but they would get this like visitation from this older woman, and they would, get all this information from her, and they assumed that she had passed away. And that's what the haunting was. And then they found out that the woman that was visiting them was actually a woman who I think was, going in and out of comas, and going through a lot of health stuff, who lived just down the block, who was still alive. And so it was every time she'd go into a coma or an altered state, her consciousness would come and visit them in their house. And so I just wish people understood, like when you are feeling, I tell people all the time, when you're feeling agitation around you, when you're feeling another, and you're like assuming it's a spirit, it's not. Spirit, like they've said time and time again, does not feel feelings like agitation, anger, loneliness, dread, regret, resent, hate, guilt. Like they don't experience feelings like that. We leave them here when we pass, but you can pick up on other people. and other people can even so much as project themselves into your space, and they can move things and they can shift things and they can touch your arm. And a lot of them won't be that strong with it, but you can telepathically hear them and actually sense their emotions. And so a lot of what we're sensing is other people, but for whatever reason, people are very scared of that possibility. However, the more we learn about it, the more we can learn how to be conscious with our own energy and emotions, and we can actually learn how to control our space and our boundaries a little bit more. So Eric's saying, yeah, this is really important stuff to be sharing and discussing. And he's saying as well, a lot of people have telepathic communication because they're meant to have telepathic communication, because he goes, the larger part of you is non-physical, and he's showing your body. And he said, we say this a lot on here, but the larger part of you is non-physical. And so here's your body, here's what you think your physical space is, right? And he's like, but you actually are so much more this. And he's showing this massive ball of color and light that expands out from the person. And he said, and actually you have this cord of light that connects up. He's like, it's kind of like an octopus arm. Like it goes up into this larger consciousness, and he's showing on Earth, all these apartment buildings and homes, and there's all these cords of light going up from the homes and the apartments from all the people walking on the sidewalk have a cord of light going up. Their dogs and their cats and squirrels and birds all have these cords of light going up, and they all go up into this big, larger energy mass, right? Like, let's just say it's like a higher consciousness where we're all connected and we're all one. So it's almost like an octopus with all of the little arms going down, or a tree with all of the limbs and all of the roots going out. He's like, so you think that you forget that you're this larger thing, right? Because you're really like at the end of this cord of light focused down into your physical experience, but you really are strongly connected to the whole. So having telepathy, whether it's from being nonverbal or autistic, he's like, a lot of ADHDers are highly telepathic, and it drives them a little cuckoo bananas because they don't understand. But he's going, whether you have dementia or whether you're just like he's like, like an enlightened being, jokingly. But he's like, no, a lot of you guys have this telepathic communication ability with people that you love, because you care about them so much that your energy gets like intertwined. He's like, it's like intermingled with them. So you're a little bit more likely to hear them or sense them or feel them or know them, even if they're halfway across the world. And there's a really great book, if you guys are curious about this, where this is talked about and mentioned. And it's called, oh my God, I'm going to butcher it. Explorers of the Infinite. And it's like the hidden spiritual experiences of outdoor athletes or something like that. And I believe it's out of print. I've mentioned on the podcast before, but I'll try to link it up in the show notes or find something for you guys on it. But it's a fantastic book. And it has a bunch of experiences where people talk about having telepathy with their boyfriend who's, like summoning Kilimanjaro or like climbing in the Himalayas or something halfway across the world, where they got injured and somehow their girlfriend in the US knew about it. So there are a lot of these types of experiences, and Eric is saying a lot of people have it more with people that they love because of that intertwining or that soul entanglement. But he's also saying you can have these encounters with people that you don't know that who just have this highly telepathic and highly he said, well, it's like you guys call it spiritual, but he's like, it's not spiritual. It's more like an innate ability that you guys have just forgotten. He said, you guys use cell phones and you created all this technology to mimic it, because it's like you subconsciously know it's there, all of you. And so you created all these devices and social media and all this stuff to try and mimic it or try to get closer to it. But actually that stuff sometimes takes you out of it more. He said at the same time, it's also catalyzing it. So it's kind of like chicken or the egg right now. He's like, it's kind of like it can block it, but it can also catalyze it. It depends on the person. But he's showing that a lot of people have more telepathy than they think. And he said, sometimes you get a daydream and it's like real random. And it comes with all this, like these thoughts and these ideas. And you're like, man, this is cool. Where the hell did this come from? He's like, yeah, that's not by accident. Picking up on other people, or you're getting something from your guides. He says, especially if it gives you a warm, fuzzy, excited, enthusiastic, peaceful feeling. And he's like, that's your spirit guides. If there's a lot of emotion and it's like dread and anger, and you're seeing all these things in your head, and you're like, man, what the hell just happened to me? I was bouncing along having a hunky-dory day. He's like, then that's how you know that's another human. Like you're picking up on other people. And that's a lot of what telepathy is. And he's saying there's a lot of people that call themselves sensitive, empaths, things like that. And he said, actually, you guys are just intuitive. So you're having telepathy experiences, and you're actually meant to distill the energy from them and use the energy to catalyze creativity. And he's pointing out a lot of people who are really good inventors and really good composers and writers and authors. He's like, but like the ones who are really good problem solvers, he goes, those guys are dialed in. They're dialed into collective intelligence. So they're very telepathic, like they can read the larger collective. That's what telepathy will help you do too. So they can see trends out ahead. It makes them more intuitive, but they're also, he's showing like higher consciousness, being able to tap into higher frequency and hear from soul guidance, spiritual guidance, and soul plans. And he said, so that'll tell them, hey, like here's the things going on earth that I can hear and see and feel and all these things. But then here's also my plan, who I'm meant to be, how I am meant to work. And he said, now, sorry guys, I keep burping today, but he's saying you guys have these awesome spiritual encounters with people. He's like, they're spiritual encounters of the third kind. Over here joking. But he said they're really, really funny because sometimes you can have them with people you haven't met yet. And that happens quite a bit with people who have dementia, Alzheimer's, autism, ADHD, or they're nonverbal or something like that. And he said, and also a lot of kids coming in who don't have any of those things will also be having this telepathic communication ability. And so he's saying this is actually really important. And he's saying, but I digress, because he's jokingly saying it because he's like, I know that we said that we talked just about dementia, but this is really a much larger discussion than just dementia. But he's saying, but that this all kind of comes back to, hey, you're all much more connected than you think. And sometimes just because we don't understand what's happening with a person doesn't mean that what's happening with them is bad or wrong. He said, a lot of people are having more and more of this sort of watery consciousness where they're walking between worlds, walking between timelines. He said, it's not really timelines. It's more like your past life, because all lives are happening at the same time at the end of the day. So you can feel and sense these other lives, but you can also feel and sense other people living their lives. And that can be really confusing because then you're like seeing them doing that, or you're seeing it through first person, which happens to a lot of people. And they don't realize like, oh, that's not my life. It's not meant for me. So he's saying, yeah, a lot of people jump consciousness. Like they can kind of jump and they can see through other people's eyes because consciousness, it really exists in everyone at once. And it's almost like their field of vision or what they're tuned into can shift and change. So suddenly they're aware of someone else's time, someone else's experience happening at the same time or happening in the future. And he's saying, so now what's really, really cool, if you want to get really trippy, he said, he's showing me how so many of these kids are being born, right? And he said a lot of them, like way off in the future too, are already sending telepathic messages back. And he said, because they're much more aware, it's much more, he's like, it's normalized, it's accepted, it's actually like discussed and taught more. And he said, so these kids are already working on sending information and telepathic messages backward. And I was like, he's showing me like a loop from past, present, future. And I was like, that is wild. But it's like, it's going between their brains and our brains. And he said, so sometimes when y'all are talking to spiritual guides, I'm telling you right now, you're talking to the beings of the future, like where humanity is evolving. And he said, we know it's really trippy, but there's a reason you're seeing this influx and this rise in people who have these abilities with the spiritual awakening happening, and it's going to get bigger. And he's showing like ADHD and autism, rates of ADHD and autism increasing. So he said, now I don't want to make this like hippy dippy woo woo bullshit, but it's actually very, very scientific. And he said it's going to get more and more prevalent in the years to come. And he's showing like some of it really, really, really starting to show up in the next like 25, 30, 40, 50 years. But he said, but you're really going to be seeing a lot of this now. Like things are, he said, once you tip the scales on this and he's showing genetics and DNA, how quickly and it can evolve, like almost it hits a tipping point. He said, once that happens, it can just be really, really easy to just, whoop, here we go. we're on that train, and, train's taking off, leaving the station, and that's that. He said, and then from there, things can happen pretty fast. So he is like, this is a really exciting time. And so one of the things he's saying too is now, because people are so much more telepathic and sensitive and are starting to talk about it more, what you're going to see is a little bit more of this tipping of the scales. You're going to also see a lot of people starting to become more aware of their own thoughts, their own feelings, their own energy, and how to pull their energy back in. And he said, focus, like really be focused in their own experience. And also more and more people are going to be aware of who they are and why they came, as opposed to other people. So it's over time, people are going to be able to differentiate a little bit more without getting caught up in, like, he's like, like cultural conditioning and shit like that. People aren't going to fall prey to it as much because they see how much it hurts them to think that they have to be a way that they're not. Now, the other thing he's saying, though, is a lot of these kids coming in are going to be really telepathic and sensitive, which they've talked about before. But he's saying, but again, what's going to happen is a lot of adults are going to become suddenly very hyper aware that they have to really watch their shit, right? Because their kids know everything. And he said, now, you probably heard this on some of the other podcasts that have covered these types of things, like telepathy tapes, etc. But these kids, like, you can't hide shit from them. You can't lie to them about how you feel. You can't lie when you're having a bad day. If you're thinking certain thoughts, you're not going to be able to hide that. They know. They're mind readers. And so he's saying, so they know when you're lying to them or lying to yourself, even if it's something where, like, you're really, really hiding an emotion even from yourself or hiding a memory from yourself, they'll see it and they'll know it. And he said this is going to make a lot of people feel vulnerable, like they don't have privacy. He said, but we've been telling you guys for a long time, you're going to have to get used to having less privacy, and that less privacy is going to lead to more authenticity and more honesty. And he said, it's almost like your consciousness is preparing for it before it's coming, because there's this big rise now in people, like, he's like, going to therapy and taking care of cleaning up their side of the street and taking care of themselves. He said, it's almost like you guys kind of knew out ahead that you'd need to be starting to clean shit up in your heads and your hearts, And he's like winking at me. I'm like, yeah. And I was like, is that the future kids coming back telling us like intuitively, like, hey, clean it up so that we don't have such a hard time later? And he was like, maybe a little. He's like, just a wee bit. And he's doing that thing where you squeeze your fingers really tight and you're like, a little wee bit maybe. But he's saying, but also you guys just naturally intuitively pick up on the future change that's happening. He said, because it's coming, these kids are coming from you. They're coming from your DNA. That's part of the incarnational cycle and the evolution of the species. He said, it's meant to be this way. And he said, he used to know this. He said, like, ancient civilizations, he said, especially matriarchal ones way back when, they knew this. This was natural. And it's just, he said, it's kind of a lost art. Think about it like that. It's an art you already know, but like, it's in there. It's already been done, but it's just kind of lost to a lot of people. And he's saying so many people, they know who they are inside, but they don't live that. And that's going to be really hard with the future generation of kids. He said already there's so many people who can already sense that. So it's causing this bubbling up of the old emotions. So those are going to come up and out first. And then people are going to be able to live more authentically. He said a lot of people already with the spiritual awakening, it's kind of like they couldn't go back if they wanted to. They couldn't go back to trying to live a way that doesn't work for them, or be a person, or, put on a mask or a social mask that just like doesn't work. He said, this is really a good thing, even if it like kind of upsets other people's apple carts or pisses other people off because you're not performing, or you are, not holding you're holding your boundaries now, and they're used to being able to walk right over them. He's like, but it's really important that a lot of you guys really know he said, know thyself. Know thyself. He said, this is also kind of like in Dante's Inferno, he gets dunked into the river twice. And he said, this is kind of that cleansing process of him relieving himself of everything that he ever did wrong, and then remembering everything he's ever done right. He said, when you are in this higher consciousness telepathic ability, and that part of you really, that part of your brain really starts to turn on and light up, you have to have more responsibility for, he said, not pretending to have certain feelings feelings or not have them, like not trying to repress them or hide them, but actually being brutally honest with yourself. And he said, but brutal honesty is kind. It's not mean at all. It holds you with compassion, and he said, so this is going to be really, really important. And these future kids are going to need us to do it. He said, there's already so many kids that are so sensitive and aware. He said, now think about it also with your elderly, back to the dementia and Alzheimer's part. A lot of our elderly, they need this from us too, because they're already trying to struggle and trying to figure out what's going on with their consciousness, because they're starting to make their return back to source. They're starting to make that transition back out of the body. And some of them start walking between worlds long beforehand. And he's always told me, my guides have always told me, I've talked about this with so many of my friends too, behind the scenes, but they've always told me dementia is going to be a really big thing in the future, because people are actually time walking, and how important it's going to be that we understand that they're actually time walking. They're not just like having dementia, but we were going to have more early onset dementia. And it would be misunderstood for a while. And now we're seeing increasing rates of early onset dementia and Alzheimer's. And so I find that really interesting that they just were talking to me about this over the last 10 years. And I've even had experiences going back and forth where I was in these like other places, and I was aware that I was me. And it's really weird, but these people were like, Allie, and they were asking me, what year is it? And I would say, at the time, I'd say 2017 or 2018 or 2019 or whatever. And it was really bizarre, because I could see my son in these visions, and he was older than he is. Even older than he is now. And I remember thinking, I know these people, but I don't know them. Like, it was like I was with people that I didn't recognize, but my son was there. So it's very interesting, because it's like already having those time walking experiences. I'm sure it makes my future self look like she's having dementia. Because it's like, and so I kind of get it. But I was also aware of like my son and my family, not like my parents, but like who these other people were that I'll have in my life in the future. They'll know that this is possible, something I can do, and that many of us are starting to do. Like, they'll kind of be in that crew of people that understands. And so they won't be like judging it or whatever. They'll just know that it's something that happens sometimes. And I've also seen for so many women who are really spiritual women, or just are kind of like playing with more and more of these concepts now. If they do have children, their children will be among the kids that are much more sensitive. So it's important for us to be already, tapping into and harnessing and understanding this ability, because we are going to really change the future for these children and set a much more stable foundation for them to grow and to learn from once they come into our world and into physical form. Like, they're going to need us. They're going to need us to really hold the ground. And these kids, because they're so hyper connected and they're so attuned, and they still remember so much of, their non-physical experience from which they came, and their soul plans and in their past lives, and they're so telepathic. They're very wise. They're here to teach us. They're here to guide us, and we need to look at them like they're our teachers and our mentors. So I know this kind of went across a couple different topics, but I hope that this is really helpful for some other people. And I can share some more of my own telepathic experiences that I've had. I've talked to a couple of people. There's a little boy named Oliver that I've talked to several times, and he always is showing me hand signals. And I'm like, he's clearly nonverbal, and he's just a little sweetie. And he loves to come, and he likes to just sit, but he loves to chit chat along. And then I also have had, again, a lot of these time walky type of experiences and dreams and stuff like that, where I'm bouncing up into the future and or seeing and or visiting people and that I'm like, oh, I'm going to meet this person. And then I'll kind of forget it for a bit, and then I'll meet them later and be like, wait a minute. And it's almost a feeling of deja vu. So I've had a lot of those. So I can do a whole episode on them if anyone's interested. I know some people were asking about time walking and dementia and Alzheimer's and the spiritual purpose and what's going on with these things. I hope that this is really, really helpful for everyone though, because I just feel like this is such a good topic. Now, One more piece I'm going to cover really quickly that Eric is kind of over here pointing out. And he said, so the other thing we want you to understand is since you can communicate with people that you don't even know yet, a lot of you guys have the ability to do this with people that you are going to meet in the near future, almost like your consciousness knows them before you meet them. And so he's showing me, he said, a lot of you guys, though, you need to learn how to discern and distinguish things, because a lot of people will have a telepathic or higher self connection with someone that they are, and they become infatuated with them because they can feel all of their feelings and feel really deeply about them. And so it's really important that you're differentiating and knowing that it's not always for that. So these telepathic communications, these telepathic connections, like I can't tell you how many readings I've done where I've seen just some wonderful, amazing women who get really, really caught on their exes or a particular person because they'll be like, well, it's got to be this person or bust, right? And it's and they're like, I don't understand why I'm still so connected. And I'm like, well, because you're sensitive and you're telepathic, but that doesn't mean that you're supposed to be with them. Now, so I don't want to feed everyone's delulu too much, because just because you can feel someone when they're miles away after you've broken up doesn't mean that they're your soulmate. If they're treating you like garbage, they're not your soulmate. If they treated you like garbage when you were together, they're not your soulmate. You know, if they aren't in it, they don't care, they're not your soulmate. Just because you can pick up on their energy or understand what's going on with them does not mean that you're meant to like put your life on hold for them. Okay. Or wait around for them or try to get them back or whatever. Just because you've had a past life together doesn't mean you're supposed to be together. Now that said, there are people who will have really strong telepathic communication with people before they meet them. And it's almost like you're preparing your consciousness for meeting them. And that's where we have to just have a lot of discernment. And you also have to do a lot of detaching, my friends. And I'll do a whole podcast episode on this type of stuff because this can be really hard. But I do know people who have had telepathic communications and higher self communication with a future partner before they ever met the partner. And then when they met them, they both had a lot of deja vu around each other, and they just felt this familiarity and this intrinsic connection that just didn't seem to make sense until it did. And, for both of them, it was because there was a really strong communication long before they knew each other. And we were able to pick up things about the future partner long before they came in. And I always tell people, like, if you're not supposed to know, like if there's too much there, like your guides don't want you to fuck it up. You know what I mean? So they will kind of block you from being able to know too much about this potential future partner. But some people understand everything. They'll see like the person's name. They'll see exactly how they're going to look, exactly how they're going to meet, all this type of stuff. And I always say, if you're meant to know it, you'll know it. But for the most part, with the telepathic communication, we have to have some ethics with that. We can't use it to be like manipulating people or trying to call in a specific partner. Like, this isn't to be used to fuck up other people's lives or like mess around with this type of stuff. So that's a lot of what we are going to be kind of discovering, I think, in this next generation is, I mean, really, like when you're in that heightened state where you can have that higher telepathy, you're more likely to be in a more higher consciousness or loving consciousness, but not everyone is. So it's just really important that you are having discernment and you're having awareness that just because you can pick up on a potential future person and have conversations with them doesn't always mean it's the best and highest thing to do. Like I said, when I pick up with other people telepathically, I really pay attention to where is their emotional state today. Are they in the headspace to even have a conversation? Like even when my son and I are tuning in together, it really has to be in the right frequency. And when we're in higher frequencies, it's much easier. Actually, and our communication is very seamless. And it's really fun. Like, we'll be sitting together and it will literally be like finishing each other's sentences over and over and over. And I'll say like I just saw this in my mind, and he'll go, me too. And I'll be like, oh my God, I just saw that too. So it gets like really fun. Like, we'll play games with it and stuff to develop it. And there are a lot of fun things you can do to develop it. But one thing we found over and over is it really works best when you are in a loving, playful, peaceful state of consciousness, because again, we want to be cognizant of who we are and what we're putting out there, especially if we're going to be having this higher telepathic communication. Also, your emotional state can distort and change how you interpret messages. And so just think about how often people will be in like their everyday lives, you know what I mean? And having a normal conversation with someone, and they'll completely misunderstand them because of their own emotions or mental state or stress that day. So if you can do that in just a normal conversation, or do that with a normal email at work or a normal conversation on the phone, imagine how much more that can happen with like intuition, telepathy, and messages from spirit guides. So just keep that in mind, that like your emotions can dictate how you interpret things. So I know that this kind of bounced a little bit, but I hope that this was an insightful episode for some people. If you want to hear more, give me a shout. I have my podcast submission page linked in the show notes, as well as other things. I do have some fun stuff coming up this month where we're going to have a course where you can learn how to develop your own business based on doing intuitive and psychic and mediumship readings, and you'll learn how to sharpen your skills and learn the difference between reading the person versus reading from spirit, which is always really important. I see people not have that discernment a lot, and it royally fucks with readings. So you will learn that. You'll learn and get a support group to like kind of rip off the spiritual band-aid. And then I have a really fun like higher level spiritual woo-woo changemaker crew. And that's going to be really fun. And that'll be about 6 months long with a fun meetup at the end. And that one I will link up in the show notes. It's just going to be a really great experience. I don't want to chit chat your ears off today. So you guys go and have a fantastic day. Thank you so much for listening. If you have questions about this topic, stories about this topic, please feel free to reach out, because I love hearing them and I may use them in a future episode of the podcast. All right, you guys go have a good one. Goodbye.